We had a great conference over the weekend, actually Friday, Saturday. We had several visiting professors here, some from Japan, one from China, and one from Michigan, although she was a Japanese specialist. So it was kind of an odd mixture of Japanese computing and robot making, robotics, I suppose, and ethics, because the concern was cyber ethics or robot ethics. So we started with a movie Thursday night that was Ex Machina. I think I told you guys that I was playing it. So we watched that, and we had a pretty good sized room full of people watching it, but we didn't end up spending any time really talking about it because it ended at around 9 o'clock and everybody left. So we actually ended up with so much pizza I couldn't believe it. That was good. But if you're familiar with Ex Machina, that's where a cyborg. No, cyborgs are robots and humans, so it wasn't a cyborg, it was a pure robot. Which is interesting, by the way. The word robot comes from the Russian robot, which means to work. So it's basically a worker. It's kind of just fun. But in any case, how many of you have seen Ex Machina? I don't want to ruin it for you, but the interesting thing is this robot so human-like that it would fool you into thinking it was human? And if so, it passes what's called the Turing test. Alan Turing came up with the idea of how you would be fooled by a computer. The difference is in Alan Turing's test, you're not supposed to see the computer, so you don't know who's in the other room, the Chinese rooms, so to speak. And so you're typing back and forth to this person in the other room, and you can't tell whether it's a person or a computer. So the test, the computer passes if it fools you into thinking that it's a person. But in Ex Machina, the robot is obviously a robot, but apparently fools us into thinking it's a she, is conscious. Her name is Ava, etc. So it's kind of an interesting question about, personhood status, self-consciousness. It seems like for it to pass that Turing test, it has to be self-conscious, etc. So that was all interesting. Then one of the professors from Japan who was here is the inventor of a therapy doll robot. It's a robot, actually, named Pero, which is it looks like and feels like a baby seal. One of the white baby seals that you can find on the ice floes. In fact, he had a video of him flying to Canada, taking a helicopter out to the ice floes where they found some seals, including the baby seals, and so he got to meet some baby seals up close and film them, and that's how he recorded the sounds they made and everything. So he made these dolls to look just like baby seals, and they react to you're touching them and talking to them in 5 languages. And basically they're great for therapy. They don't walk or anything, they just kind of cuddle with you and react to your cuddling. And so he had lots of video of him giving mostly elderly people who were suffering from the tsunami and Fukushima catastrophe in Japan, who were totally withdrawn, distraught, missing their children, missing their pets, and so on, and just kind of curled up, not interacting with anybody. and they would come in and lend them these to hold these robots, and they would start to basically come out of it, interact with the robot almost just like it was a child or a pet. So it was pretty interesting to do that. But that was pretty much his whole focus, was using these kinds of robots as therapy dolls and things, because you don't have to clean up after them, they don't poo, so a lot of the facilities that these people were in after the tragedies there couldn't handle pets and things of that sort, so it was kind of interesting. Then we had some other presentations on cyber ethics, of the nature of how much privacy we've lost because of the new intrusive nature of cyber ethics, plus concerns with things like your cell phones can be hacked, and if your cell phone's connected to your car, a hacker could basically take over your car, those kinds of things. My one little fun thing was mentioning my bathroom scale that emails me now and tells me it needs batteries and stuff. And that feels weird, going into the bathroom and seeing this scale looking at me and thinking, what's that scale thinking, It's almost like it's a person. Because it emails me, when it feels like it, that's kind of scary, that's weird. There's also an interesting presentation on how Japanese media deals with robots. Because it goes all the way back to Astro Boy, I guess? So, you remember Astro Boy? You had like rockets for feet, and you could fly to places and stuff. So he was a robot. And so the one Professor Dunscombe, our history department chair and he was the head of the Confucian Institute here for a while. He did a presentation on the history of robots in Japanese media and so on. And he did a slideshow, and it was interesting. As I was watching it, it dawned on me that every single robot that was a humanoid wore a tie. And the head robot actually wore a bow tie. But all the people did not. So I decided at that point, okay, I'm not wearing ties anymore. Because if the Japanese people think, you're a robot if you're wearing a tie, I don't want to be, have the. It was funny too, because Dean Stalvey of the College of Arts and Sciences was there for this presentation, and I looked over, and of course he had the bow tie, and Paul Dunscombe had his tie, I had my tie on. So it was like, whoa, we're in Japanese culture, we're clearly lower social status if we're wearing ties. So that was pretty funny, actually. So it was interesting. Lots of food, by the way, mostly pizza. And it was not really that good, the pizza. I thought, wow, we should have given at least Japanese visitors better pizza than this. That was kind of awful. Part of it was, I think, the pizza arrived too soon, and Professor Raymond Anthony told them to go away, and they came back like half an hour or an hour later. So that way the pizza was good and cold, which, because they're not going to be able to warm it up or anything. But so that was interesting. So to logic then. This is our last class to discuss syllogisms before we actually do the test. So Wednesday we'll do the test. And so today we should make sure that everybody feels comfortable with doing syllogisms. So I thought I would just introduce a couple and ask you to do them. Does that make sense? Find out if this actually works. How many of you feel like you'd be fine doing them? They're not that hard, right? The more you do them, the more you feel just like anything else. There it is. There are, I think, a couple of confusing links on my website because there are older versions of this second test that I used to use that test you on other aspects of these sections. So as constructing categorical statements, that kind of thing. Those are not going to be part of the way I've done the test. All I do is give you actually 10 syllogisms, right? And all you have to do is write out the syllogism, give the Venn diagram for it, determine whether it's valid or invalid, and actually you could use the list because it's open book. So you could use the list to make sure it tells you which ones are valid. So it's not like it's really hard to find out which ones are valid, right? But show the diagram. By the way, if you're on the web, you could actually look up the names of the syllogisms and it will give you the diagrams. So this is really more on your honor, convincing me that you know the work so that I'm giving you an A because you actually know the work, right? Rather than just giving you the A because you're here, you paid the money and deserve it, basically. American consumer ethic, right? If you paid for it, you should get it, right? It's an odd thing, isn't it, in American education where you pay for the course and then you go attend to the course and the professor has the opportunity of saying, you fail. That's just totally un-American. So that's weird. Okay. Does everybody have paper? I know, that's a weird thing. Some of you do. All of you do? All of you have paper. Wow, that's pretty interesting. So, the one that actually looks like, so this is the one, and you could ignore the 40 minutes because you actually have the whole time for the class period. In fact, if you really need to, and there may be a few that do, especially if you can't make it, you can actually take the test at home. You can take it with you, just give it back. Right. So basically you have a class period to do this. So how about we try this one? So EAE2, what I could do is let you start and then jump in and do my answer to it. Does that make sense? That way you can see if you've got it. It always feels easier when you're just watching someone do something, but then when you get on the bicycle and try to pedal, you notice you fall over. That makes sense. So EAE2. You finished already? You already did it? Should I do it? Okay. Anyway, every once in a while, I'm old enough, I make mistakes, so if I make a mistake. A2, right? So, no, all, no, S is P. It's figure 2, so that would be 1, 2. Right, so no P is M. All S is N. No S is P. Diagram. No P is M, so there's no members there. All S is M, so there's no members down here. By the way, no, one of you, actually, I guess it was more than one of you, in sending me the diagrams for AO2, I think it was, right? Made the mistake of not filling in all the way through here. So when you're doing the diagrams, remember that these should always be the same. So the A statement is always going to look like this all the way, even if there's like a line going through it, right? Don't forget to fill in this whole section, right? Now if you have no S or P, it's always going to be filled in here, even if there's a line going through it. Remember to fill in the whole section, right? And if you have some S's P, the X is somewhere in the middle, but the conflict, of course, is if there's a line going through it and you don't know which section it ought to be in, it has to be on the line to recognize the ambiguity of the statement. And the same thing with the O statement, because there might be a line going through this section, right? Right? Because they go like this. So if it's in here, how do you determine which section it should be in? If you don't know, it should be on the line to represent that it's ambiguous. So notice I filled in this whole section here because it's an A statement, and so all S is M, right? So it has to look just like the top left diagram over there. So and only diagram the premises, do not diagram the conclusion. I mean, you can think in your mind, okay, what would it look like if I diagram the conclusion? Because that's what I'm looking for to see if it's given, right? So no S is P. Notice in this particular case, it's impossible for any S to also be P because it's all empty there, right, of members. So this one is a valid argument. In fact, it's valid in both systems, the traditional and the modern. So, is that what you had? Yes? Pretty easy? Is this boring? I hope it's not boring. Right, it's a little bit repetitious. It is repetitious. It's just a system. 256 possible syllogisms. You could actually diagram them all. In fact, I'm sure they're all on the web. And 24 are valid according to Aristotle, 15 according to Boole, and so you basically end up with very clear and also notice very testable situation in this. Okay, so I erase this one. Yes. Second one, AAA1. We've done that multiple times. That's Barbara. So everyone knows that's valid. no statement, sum S is P. And it's figure 4. So here. No P is M. Sum M is S. Be right there. No S is P. It's not clear that that's the case at all. There could be members there, so it's invalid. And so now we get to play with the rules and try to figure, okay, so what rules is this breaking? Middle term is distributed in at least one place, so it's not undistributed middle. But no S is P. S, the minor term, is distributed in the conclusion, but notice it's undistributed in the premise where it occurs. So here we have a case of illicit minor, because it's the minor term that is distributed in the conclusion but undistributed in the premise. So illicit minor. Anything else wrong with it? Nope, that looks good. But still, of course, you only need to break one rule, right? And it's invalid, so illicit minor for that one. Notice what I'll do is I'll give you points for the argument form, points for the diagram, points for whether it's valid or invalid, and points if it's invalid for your recognition of which rules it breaks. And so if there's 10 arguments, basically I'm looking for 10 points. So maybe 2 points for each of those things. Does that make sense?
Can you describe the distributed and undistributed part?
Yes, yes. And I think we have a nice outline of that. Should be so I think he even does that the same way. Okay, so page 172. Top, in that little green insert there, notice you have the 4 types of statements or propositions: A, E, I, O, quantity, universal, universal, particular, particular, quality, affirmative, negative, affirmative, negative, and term distributed, right? You see that on the right side? So the subject is distributed in the A statement. Both the subject and predicate are distributed in the E statement. No term is distributed in the I statement, and the predicate is distributed in the O statement. So it's all logical possible arrangements are given in those 4 types of statements, right? And essentially what we're saying distribution is when you know something about all the members of the set, right? So in an A statement, when I say all S is P, I know that all of S is distributed into P. But notice I don't know that P is distributed at all because there's, I just know that all S is in P. I don't know where P also could be, right? When I have the E statement and I'm saying no S is P, I know something about all S. None of them are distributed in P. and I know that no P is so P is distributed. I know something about all of it. None of them are S, and I know something about all members of S. None of them are P, right? With the I statement, some S are P, so I don't know something about all the members of S, and I don't know something about all the members of P. So they're both undistributed, just the opposite of the E statement, which notice, by the way, they're contradictories, right? This is all really very mathematical, right? And the O statement then, it's just the opposite of the A statement. So where the A statement, you have the subject is distributed and the predicate not. With the O statement, you have the subject undistributed and the predicate is distributed. So it's really like a mathematical set of relationships. And I suppose the really surprising thing for a lot of people who've been speaking all their lives, basically, and thinking, wow, I'm really good at English, but I'm terrible at math. Surprise, surprise. If you're good at speaking, you're actually good at math, because speaking is math. It's a mathematically based system. You just maybe never put it into symbols before. But of course, that's what written language is, etc. So that's kind of cool. So EI, E4. You did. Any questions on any of these so far? Does this look easy? Feel like you're ready for the test? How about those of you that aren't here? Are you ready for the test? Never have a sense of confidence with those folks. It's kind of one of those things. AEE4. And I know some people are missing because they're sick, or they have to have childcare, or they've forgotten how to get to the building. So AEE4. I lost the eraser. I have an A statement, no statement, no S is P. It's figure 4. So all P is M, no M is S, no S is P. All P is M, so there are no members of P down here. No M is S, so there's no members here. So no S is P, and notice that that's clearly the case. There's no possible members here, so that is fine. Notice how it's wonderful to use all these valid forms. You get to use these for like term papers and stuff. You can arrange your arguments. Happened to Jimmy? He never came back with his paper for me to evaluate. That's the harder part, because that's where you have to interpret the everyday speech and arrange it into these statement types, and then try to find where the argument is, right? Because number one, we're not really all aware of this system, even though we're basically using it, says Aristotle. And so, of course, you could be making mistakes. And plus, we don't want to be boring. So you don't want to just have it arranged this way, because no one will listen to you after the first couple of minutes. You're bored already. Because it's just so darn logical. There's nothing interesting there to keep us going. So AEE4, OAO2. have a sum, don't forget the not, all sum S is not P, and it's figure 2, P S, sum P is not M, all S is So, remember the nice tool that if you have, in your two premises, you have one premise that has more information than the other one, makes a lot more sense to diagram that one first. So all S is M has a lot more information. So I'll diagram that first. Then I'll go back to my major premise, sum P is not M, which means it's down here. They can't have it up in here. Notice since I already diagrammed this, I know it's not going to be on the line here because there aren't any members over here. So sum S is not P. Oh, what did I just do? Okay, no, I did it right. Sum P is not N. Okay. So now I look for my conclusion. Sum S is not P. Well, that's not really given. I would have to have an X over here. But notice I don't have it. So that's not given. So this is invalid. Felt close, didn't it? But not quite. So now what's wrong with it? Well, let's see. P is distributed here because it's an O statement, right? So P is distributed. But if I go up and I see where P occurs in the premise, notice it's undistributed. So now I have a case of illicit major, because it's the major term that is distributed in the conclusion and not in the premise. Is there anything else wrong with it? Well, let's see, I have a negative conclusion, but I have one negative premise, so that's okay. I have a particular conclusion, but I do have a particular premise, so it's not breaking the rule of existential fallacy. Let's see. Is the middle term distributed? Yes, it is. It's distributed there. So it's invalid because of illicit major. Breaks one rule. So that's OAO2. AII2, I think we did that one, but we could do it again. Can I erase this? Good, right. P is M, sum S is M, sum S is P. So all P is M, so there are no members of P down here. Sum S is M, and since there's two possible places for it, and I don't know where it would have to go, put it on the line. So then the next question is sum S is P. Is that given? Not really. It would have to have an X in this section for it to be given. So this is invalid. Remember, if you have 256 possible syllogisms, only 24 are valid for Aristotle. the lion's share of all of these syllogisms that are out there are bad argument forms, right? And clearly, most of them are unusable, right? Unless you want to be funny and make jokes with them, in which case they might be good for jokes. So all P is in. So this invalid Y. Well, both of these are undistributed, so it's not going to be illicit, minor, or major. But how about my middle term? It's undistributed there, undistributed there. So I have undistributed middle. Looks like the only rule broken to me. Since neither of these are distributed, we don't have illicit, minor, or major. We don't have a negative conclusions, neither do I have a negative premise. I do have an existential conclusion, but I have an existential premise, so it's just undistributed middle. As if, well, just undistributed, but that's sufficient for it to be invalid. EEE3. Am I going too fast, or is this good? Yes? So EEE3. So no S is P. Figure 3, so 1, 2, 3. So no M is P, no M is S. It's invalid right off the bat because it's exclusive premises. That means there's you have to have at least one affirmative premise, right? If you have a negative premise, you must have a negative conclusion. You can't have a negative premise and an affirmative conclusion. But if you have a negative premise and a negative conclusion, you can only have one negative premise, you can't have both, right? So it's already going to be invalid, exclusive premises. But not to forget, we should diagram it. M, S, P, no M is P. No M is S. Conclusion, no S is P, obviously not clearly the case, so it's invalid. So what else? Everything is distributed throughout the whole argument. So we don't have illicit, major, or minor. The middle term is distributed, but we have exclusive premises, so that's what's wrong with this one. Should I tell a joke or something? Do you know what you get when you cross 2 pizzas and a bicycle? A pie-sicle. Do you know where Mickey and his friends were when the lights went out? In the dark. what do you get when you cross a porcupine and a cactus plant? Sore hands. That's from a Disney book, right? Those are jokes. So AAA4. All, S is P. Figure 4. So all P is M. All M is S, so there's no numbers all the way over here. So all S is P, not given, clearly invalid. What rule does it break? All S is distributed here, but it's undistributed here, so we have illicit minor. Middle term is distributed, so that's not a problem. So it looks like it's just illicit minor. That's the main problem. You get faster at this? Another question, of course, is can you actually hear these arguments as people are saying things? Can you recognize the form of the argument? You get a sense of whether it's valid or invalid when you're listening to people discussing things. So 0002, ready? Obviously invalid because we have exclusive premises again. But let's go some S is not P. It's figure 2, 1, 2. So some P is not M, and some S is not M. So some P is not N, so it has to be somewhere on the line, because there's two possible places for it. Some S is not M, so it has to be on the line. Some S is not P, clearly don't know, it's invalid. Exclusive premises is one of the reasons. Notice also that P is distributed in the conclusion, but it's undistributed in the premise, so we also have illicit major. Middle term is distributed in both places, so it's not that. So exclusive premises and illicit major for 0002. So AEE3. 3, 1, 2, 3. All M is P, no M is S. SP. All M is P, so there's no members out here. No M is S. No S is P. Invalid. So no S is P. P is undistributed in its premise, but it's distributed there, so at least we have illicit major. Little term is distributed. So illicit major. There's a problem with that one. So that's 10. So that's the practice test. Notice I have a bonus question, which would be an extra 10 points, and all you have to do is spill like some blood on the page or something. You don't actually have to know the right answer, because what exactly would be the right answer? Well, E equals MC squared. If I were to put that into standard form, a lot of people then try to put it into an argument, but that's not the case. It's just a statement, right? So it's basically saying that all energy is mass times the speed of light squared. If it's energy, then it is in the set of things that are mass times the speed of light squared. So that's pretty, but you don't have to have it, anything you write there, like a smiley face, that's 10 points. It's a freebie. A freebie. So how's this feel? You feel like you're ready for the test? Remember, if you do have problems with the test, we keep going from there. We just do extra till everybody has an A. That's like the goal. By the way, if you're curious, the test is actually already posted. All you have to do is remember that I was a Russian linguist. So if you type Realna, there's the test. Realna just means real. So this is the test I'll give you Wednesday. So that actually could be a take-home, right? So if you want, you could just drop it by. I don't know if you want a day off from class Wednesday. You could still come here and just see all the people that usually don't come to class, how they do. Could be fun. So you'll have someone's. Can you tell me what a statement is again? What's an E statement? I don't remember that. It's not my fault. So that's on the web. So EAE3, AEE2, AII4, AEA4, OAI2, III2, EEE1, AEE3. You can tell most of them are going to be, and there's the same bonus question. Shoot. Am I too easy? It is a 101 course, right? So it's like there's not supposed to be an easier course than 101. Unless it's like O something, which I guess we have if they're. I'm learning. Well, yes, you should be getting your money's worth, otherwise you have every right to complain. I went to the store for a gallon of orange juice and they gave me an empty gallon jug. I said, yeah, here you go. Go fill it on any orange tree you find on the Glen Highway. That's not really orange juice. Oh well. So do you see how to find that? It's actually wrong because we're not using the copy. But so exam 1, copy 14. Yeah. I guess I could post it on my web. You wouldn't find it unless I told you where it was. You know, you can hide things on your own web page by just not giving everybody a link to. It's kind of fun. I've got a lot of hidden things there. Let's change. Trouble is, since I've had the page since 1995, a lot of the hidden things I don't remember are there either. Every once in a while I find things that I'm like, what? I don't remember this. When did I do a whole page on Madonna? Why would I be interested in Madonna? Do you want me to slowly page through this again? You already say that's one of the advantages of being on the internet. You could just go, got it. You don't need notes. Awesome. So then the hard part is using this to actually analyze arguments. So here's an argument by David Brooks. It was from Friday. So he says, we live in a big, diverse society. There are essentially two ways to maintain order and get things done in such a society: politics or some form of dictatorship. So if it's a complex society, then either politics or dictatorship. Either through compromise or brute force. Okay, so that's a repetition of this. He's saying that if it's politics, then compromise. our founding fathers chose politics. Politics is an activity in which you recognize the simultaneous existence of different groups, interests, and opinions. So he's defining politics, right? He's basically saying it's compromise. So he's defining compromise, really. What is compromise? You try to find some way to balance or reconcile the compromise or compromise those interests, or at least the majority of them. You follow a set of rules enshrined in a constitution or in custom to help you reach these compromises. Am I missing a word here? In a way everybody considers legitimate. The downside of politics is that people never really get everything they want. It's messy, limited, and no issue is ever really settled. I think that's politics. Politics is a muddled activity in which people have to recognize restraints and settle for less than they want. Disappointment is normal. So compromise leads to disappointment. But that's sort of the beauty of politics too. It involves an endless conversation in which we learn about other people and see things from their vantage point and try to balance their needs against our own. Politics is better than the alternative, ruled by some authoritarian tyrant who tries to govern by clobbering everyone in his way. As Bernard Crick wrote in his book In Defense of Politics, politics is a way of ruling divided societies without undue violence. That's pretty interesting. Is this boring? Or is this okay? Is it okay? David Brooks, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's on TV a lot too. He's actually considered a very conservative commentator. He's written several interesting books. My favorite is The Social Animal. He also has, I think, In Defense of Character, which turns out to be, I've not even finished it. It's one of those books where you start reading it and you're like, what happened? Does that ever happen to you with a book? So as Bernard Crick wrote in his book, In Defense of Politics, politics is a way of ruling divided societies without undue violence. Over the past generation, we have seen the rise of a group of people who are against politics. These groups best exemplified by the Tea Party, which stands for taxed enough already, right? But not exclusive to the right, so both left and right, want to elect people who have no political experience. They want outsiders. They delegitimize compromise and deal-making. They're willing to trample the customs and rules that give legitimacy to legislative decision-making if it helps them gain power. Ultimately, they don't recognize other people. They suffer from a form of political narcissism in which they don't accept the legitimacy of other interests and opinions. They don't recognize restraints. They want total victories for themselves and their doctrine. This anti-politics tendency has had a wretched effect on our democracy. It has led to a series of overlapping downward spirals. The anti-politics people elect legislators who have no political skills or experience. That incompetence leads to dysfunctional government, which leads to more disgust with government, which leads to a demand for even more outsiders. The anti-politics people don't accept that politics is a limited activity. They make soaring promises and raise ridiculous expectations. When those expectations are not met, voters grow cynical and disgusted, turn even further in the direction of anti-politics. The anti-politics people refuse compromise and so block the legislative process. Absence of accomplishment destroys public trust. The decline in trust makes deal-making harder. We're now at a point where the Senate says it won't even hold hearings on a presidential Supreme Court nominee in clear defiance of custom and the Constitution. We're now at a point in which politicians live in fear if they try to compromise and legislate. We're now at a point in which normal political conversation has broken down. People feel unheard, which makes them shout even louder, which further destroys conversation. And in walks Donald Trump. People say that Trump is an unconventional candidate and that he represents a break from politics as usual. That's not true. Trump is the culmination of the trends we have been seeing for the last 30 years. The desire for outsiders, the bashing style of rhetoric that makes conversation impossible, the decline of coherent political parties, the declining importance of policy, the tendency to fight cultural battles and identify wars through political means. Identity wars, I'm misreading that. The declining importance of policy, the tendency to fight cultural battles, and identity wars through political means. Not sure what that is. Trump represents the path the founders rejected. Well, I have a question. He says it's not true that he's not a politician, but he's actually standing for all the things that he's just described as not political. He's making a mistake, isn't he? That's a contradiction. That's just me. Maybe I shouldn't be interpreting it that way. Trump represents the path the founders rejected. There is a hint of violence undergirding his campaign. There's always a whiff, and sometimes more than a whiff, of I'd like to punch him in the face. I'd like to punch Trump, or he'd like to punch someone. It seems ambiguous. I printed out a Times list of the insults Trump has hurled on Twitter. The list took up 33 pages. Trump's style is bashing and pummeling. Everyone who opposes or disagrees with him is an idiot, a moron, or a loser. The implied promise of his campaign is that he will come to Washington and bully his way through. So a dictator, right? So he is saying that Trump is anti-compromise. He's the dictator, right? And basically will use brute force, right? So Trump supporters aren't looking for a political process to address the needs. We done? What time do we go to?
2:13.
Oh, so we're good. We're good. Phew. See all these people leaving, and it made me worried. So they are looking for a superhero. As the political scientist Matthew McWilliams found, the one trait that best predicts whether you're a Trump supporter is how high you score on tests that measure authoritarianism. This isn't just an American phenomenon. Politics is in retreat and authoritarianism is on the rise. So he is saying that he's not a polit, right? That's weird. The answer to Trump is politics. It's acknowledging other people exist. It's taking pleasure in that difference and hammering out workable arrangements. As Harold Lasky put it, we shall make the basis of our state consent to disagreement. Therein shall we ensure its deepest harmony? So he's basically saying yay for politics. Boo for Trump. So it is an argument. How would we break this down into the traditional syllogistic set of arguments? Clearly have to have at least more than one. So we would have to have a Sorites, right? Which is all my sons are slim, no child of mine is healthy who takes no exercise, all gluttons who are children of mine are fat, no daughter of mine takes any exercise. So we have to translate those. So now we end up with all D or A, no E or C, all B or A, no D or E. God bless you. We have to find a pair of premises that may lead to a conclusion. This implies that the two selected statements should include attributes, candidates for elimination. Consider 1 and 3. You may use the trilateral diagram to figure things out. All D or B, all B or D. Let's now combine 6 with 4 and we conclude no B or E, but that's invalid. Combined with 7, it yields no B or C, no C or B, whose interpretation is no glutton among my children is healthy, no healthy offspring of mine is a glutton, which is invalid. Things sold in the street are of no great value. Nothing but rubbish can be had for a song. This is a whole nother one. I don't think you resolve the argument up here. So that wasn't very much use, was it? So it's hard to do this. So maybe what we should do is have an easier way of analyzing more complex arguments. Everybody thinks so. So what happened in roughly about the time of World War I, World War II, in between there, we had some mathematicians like Cantor, George Cantor, and others, Bertrand Russell, Alfred North Whitehead, Ludwig Wittgenstein, a whole bunch of them, actually. Giuseppe Piano, Italian, a whole bunch of folks, all got on this kick of trying to come up with a new system of logic that would enable us to analyze more complex arguments. So notice what I was doing over here is I'm not actually putting these statements into the traditional categorical forms. I'm using if, then. Well, we could say that would be saying the same as all CS, complex societies, are, whoa, but now I have a problem. because I have Paul or dictator. Right? So that's two different things. So that's not, and if I say all complex societies are political, you know, they use politics, well, that's false, actually, according to his argument, because he's saying, it's actually saying some complex societies are political or dictators. So we would actually have to change that then and say that what he's really saying here is some complex societies are political and some complex societies are dictators. Right? Plus then he's saying that if it's political, so all political are better. Basically, right? That's what he's saying, right? All dictators are worse. All those Trump are worse. Also argue, I would think, that there's a missing conclusion, and that is thou shalt not vote for Trump. Would you say? That's pretty clearly oriented against Trump and Trump supporters. Well, if we want to, now, actually, I suppose trying to solve things like that, figure out what the arguments you're trying to do, is a good exercise for us, right? And probably knowing this system, Aristotle's system, is a good basis for any other system that you might develop. I think so. Awful lot of logic courses, by the way, though, will skip all of that and go straight to symbolic logic. And from what I've heard from students, they hate that. They don't like that. It doesn't make sense to them either. But on the other hand, the complex systems associated with those symbolic logic systems does take like a full semester for you to get comfortable with it. So if you're really going to specialize in those systems, then you really ought to spend the whole semester doing it. Or what we really ought to be able to do here is give advanced logic courses. So you take 101, but then you could also take 215 or something, which would be an advanced logic course where you're just working on symbolic systems. So what we do now is move on to the symbolic system. So after we do this test, which will be still Wednesday, right? We'll move on to the next chapter where we start looking at these modern systems, which basically try to translate everyday speech into symbols in a fluent way, so that you basically can still leave the argument exactly as it's offered by the speaker or the author, right? And yet still have a tool that you could use to more simply analyze the argument. And it saves you the trouble of having to translate it backwards into the Aristotelian system. So that's essentially where we're going to go with that. Is this fun? What's a good quiz question? Should I ask you what you think of David Brooks's argument? How many of you are familiar with David Brooks? You ever seen him before? I think I showed a video of him, didn't I?
Talked about one of his books one time.
Yeah. The Social Animal, probably. Huh?
Yeah, that's what it was.
What's this one? I don't know what this is.
Under the analysis of Shields and Brooks, that is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Judy.
So, Mark, what do you make of that debate last night?
Trump, Cruz, I think that no question about it. I mean, I think more than anything else, what I got was a sense of how dominant Donald Trump has been in setting the terms of the debate in both parties in 2016. I mean, candidates in both parties, maybe not Bernie Sanders, but virtually everybody else is responding to, reacting to. I mean, we saw Marco Rubio doing sort of a feisty, aggressive, not a knockoff Donald Trump, but sort of a variation of it. But that and then Ted Cruz's first unforced error of the season by his New York. He gave Trump a great opening, which he took advantage of.
Why don't you take a sip of water and let me turn to David. You have the same impression from?
Yeah, I'm sort of cross-pressured on that. I'm an American citizen born in Canada like Cruz, but I'm from New York, so I've got New York values. So Cruz is like more. It is a Cruz-Trump show right now. And to me, the paradox is that I thought Cruz won the debate, just had better debating
You did,
points.
you did.
I thought he was on some of the stuff, on the birther stuff. I thought he's just more forceful, more skillful as a debater. But as Mark said, Trump dominates the discussion. And so he's the central figure. Cruz may beat him, but Trump is still the story. And if you're looking for a strong leader, which the Republican Party apparently is, well, Trump is still the main arena. And so he can afford to lose a debate and still come out ahead. And that's where I think we are right now.
Well, what does that translate into, though, Mark? I mean, where does that leave this race? Does that mean it's down to Donald Trump and Ted Cruz?
Well, all the numbers in Iowa suggest it's the two of them, and with Marco Rubio nipping at the heels and Ben Carson sort of fading in the fourth or somewhere. As an example of Trump, let me just get what I thought. It was a brilliant
So
formulation.
tomorrow is
I mean, he did the birth ratio
when
President
the
Obama.
caucuses
He had his
here
people
in Alaska, right?
Hawaii who had uncovered all of this information, which turned out to be totally bogus. It's so much of
Yes.
charges and allegations always had.
That was
been.
a rhetorical
But
question.
what
The
he
answer
did
is yes.
With Cruz was on the birth issue was not that he was born in Calgary and Alberta.
Is it just
And,
Republican, or is it
but
Republican and Democrat?
He's putting the party at risk by opening himself up to a.
Any of you vote?
That even
If I made him my
Ronald
vice
Reagan.
if I made him my vice president.
You're a little
so
young to
all of a
vote?
sudden, he puts Cruz on the defensive of trying to prove a negative. I mean,
I
it
think
really is.
Your
it's
age shouldn't
true.
have anything
At
to
the
do with
same
it. I
time,
think your
Judy,
intelligence
I do wanna give a
should be
shout out
the main reason why you're allowed to vote or not.
He demonstrated character.
So if you agree with me, you should be allowed to vote. If you disagree with me, you're too dumb to vote.
To a man, without Bush, without Lindsey Graham, and no longer in the race.
That was a joke. I was just,
Possible exception of John Kasich, quite frankly. But they-
actually, that would be a problem in my own house, because my wife and I always cancel one another's votes. She votes, if I'm voting this way, she votes that way.
When they were asked, would you?
So our net result is 0.
Jeb Bush pointed out.
Not everything. Sometimes we vote.
You're talking about our friends? This
So,
is-
quick question is, what did you think of David Brooks's argument? Curious.
He's still along with the possible exception of Kasich.
Well, does that mean something for Jeb Bush? I mean, does that translate into something for him?
Well, Jeb Bush is part of a large group of people who are like the team at halftime, like the Republicans down who feel like they're down to the decide they're going to game. And that.
Here's the folks who get to vote. Here we go. Take your vote.
I would love to.
I could vote.
I'm not old enough.
Another person that's obviously intelligent enough to vote, why do they not let you guys vote just because of age? That's age discrimination.
So on this coming up Wednesday is the 19th?
Yes?
Okay, I have to take the SAT that day.
So notice that the website, if you go to that webpage,
Is that the 10th?
and you
Okay.
can take it,
I can,
you just bring it in.
my SAT gets out at like 2-ish, so are your office hours after this class?
Oh, or you can drop it off on the way in if you want.
Would I just,
Like,
are you in your office or like?
you can slide it under my door. You know where the door is.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, you can slide it. Don't forget to put your name on each
Oh,
page.
yeah. Okay.
'Cause otherwise I'm like, who the heck is this person? They have an A, but I don't know who they are. Yes.